Welcome back to the program. With me now is Labor's Peter Khalil and the Liberal Party's Tim Wilson. Thank you so much for your time, gents. Peter Khalil, these airstrikes on Syria, what do you make of this approach from the US? Very strong support from our government and the opposition under Mr Shorten. Not so from the New Zealand PM, Jacinda Ardern, who's currently in Paris for talks with Macron. What's your view on it? Is it justified under international law?
Yeah, look, Kieran, I think it's good that Australia has bipartisan support for these airstrikes because the attacks using chemical weapons are absolutely abhorrent, and we know that they are absolutely reprehensible, and the Assad regime has continued to do this. My real concern around the strikes, though, is the effectiveness. If they succeed, and we hope they do, in getting Assad to back off from using chemical weapons again, that's great. Problem is, last year the Trump administration had a Tomahawk missile strike on a Syrian airbase, again on the back of Assad's regime's attacks, and the very next day that same airbase ran sorties and bombing runs. The Syrian Air Force ran bombing runs. So the operational effectiveness was very limited. On this particular strike, it's been much more targeted on chemical weapons facilities and the capabilities around chemical weapons and the use of it. So I think and I hope that this is successful. The broader issue about whether there's going to be an escalation amongst the West, the US, the UK, France and other allies to try and remove Assad, I don't think these strikes will actually do that. There has to be a much more concerted effort if they make that strategic calculation.
One of the issues here, Tim Wilson, which I guess would surprise a lot of people and observers of foreign policies, that Donald Trump has embraced these airstrikes, and I think the initial ones that Peter referred to there also came as a bit of a surprise from a politician that ran so strongly on America first, and many thought that he'd be isolationist, but it appears far from it, certainly from the latest episode as well.
Well, that's true, but I think what we're seeing is that as the situation evolves, Donald Trump evolves, and that's clear based on the chemical weapon attacks that happened recently, that it's led him to take this action, working with other countries, including ourselves, the United Kingdom and France. Ultimately, that's the sensible way in dealing with these attacks. As any response has to be as part of a concert of powers, trying to take a degree of responsibility and trying to take action. So the targeted strikes seem to have been effective, but let's wait and see, as Peter said, about what transpires over the coming days. And I don't expect us to see a situation where, as Peter outlined, countries are going to come together and get rid of the Assad regime. What this is probably going to do is balkanise to a certain extent what is already an incredibly balkanised conflict, and we're going to have to wait and see how it unfolds.
Well, could I just say, Kieran, the only way it changes is if there is a deal with Russia. Yes. And that just got to happen, and it should have happened 7 years ago. Yeah. And you know, the Russians have interests in Syria, as we all know, the bases, the military bases, but oil off the coast. They also have interest in sales of military hardware to the Syrian regime. A deal should have been done with Russia 6, 7 years ago. The Obama administration refused to go there, and they also drew a red line which was crossed multiple times.
Peter, I'm interested in your thoughts on whether or not you think that the Trump approach, as unpredictable as it is, that it's wrong-footing various international players, whether it be the Russians on the one hand or Pyongyang on the other, that it's so hard to predict for, you know, observers and commentators, but obviously for international players as well. Is it, in some way, is it working in the US's advantage here to have that sort of unpredictable strategic policy out of the White House?
Sure. Look, there is some advantage in his unpredictable actions, if you like. He doesn't play by the script. The orthodoxy is not there at all. It's completely unpredictable in many respects. But again, you can see a pattern. It's transactional, and it happens with some understanding of what needs to be done in the particular context of that moment. But he doesn't play by the usual foreign policy, national security script. His problem, of course, is internal as well, because the hard right, which have supported him, has started to become very critical of his interventionist approach on Syria, for example. He's getting a lot of criticism from the right because of that. So he's watching with one eye on that as well. As far as its impact internationally, it may have some wins in a sort of context around that particular issue, whether it be with Syria on the chemical weapons, whether it be with Pyongyang, as we've seen, and so on. But it's got to be backed up with a consistency over a longer period of time to get the full results.
I think we should be cautious about
all
saying that it's
guns.
simply unpredictable.
Yeah, sorry, Tim.
I mean,
Yep.
I'm not disputing the fact that, as I said at the start, Donald Trump's foreign policy positions and his degree to interventionism is evolving with events that surround it. But it's also important to recognise that these decisions and these actions aren't being taken unilaterally at all. And I've said before about the importance of the concert of powers, but somebody like Emmanuel Macron has actually been quite influential in having these discussions, particularly around drawing red lines that he's then seeking to enforce with the United States. Unlike, for instance, as Peter outlined, Obama, who set red lines that wasn't then prepared to be enforced. And as far as I can see, his broader point around the strategic position and particularly around Russia is critical and accurate. The challenge is going to be what is these interventions going to do to help shape and inform what resolution can be achieved with Russia, or whether it's going to be a perpetuation of conflict.
Yeah, indeed. Let's turn our attention to some domestic politics now. A big focus this week on energy. While the Prime Minister is going to be over at the Commonwealth Heads of Government here in Australia, the Energy Minister hosting the state and territory counterparts. Tim Wilson, so important, isn't it, for the government but also the nation, whatever framework it is, that there is some sort of bipartisanship here. And the interesting thing is the effort to undermine it in the last week or so and undermine the efforts of Josh Frydenberg have come from none other than your own colleagues.
Well, there's only one framework on the table for COAG and all governments in Australia to agree to, which is the National Energy Guarantee. It's fundamentally good policy. What it will actually do is bring into alignment for the first time the objectives of the state and the Commonwealth governments around cutting greenhouse gas emissions while also driving investment into energy production, supply and across the network. And that's critically what we need for investment. And so the only policy on the table is the one that's being considered, and it's the one that the whole nation, frankly, should be supporting. And all I can say is how important it is for the states to sign up to this agreement, because the continue to go alone approach by some states won't deliver increased investment to reduce prices, won't increase investment to deliver greater reliability, and won't deliver the investment to deliver what Australia actually needs, which is affordable, reliable power.
Yeah, I think there's a view at the state level among even some of the major Labor states as well, Peter Khalil, to get that done, because as the energy regulator has pointed out, one of the problems has been political constancy, the ability to invest some $200 billion needed in infrastructure by 2050. You can only invest with certainty, and that's not given if the next political party to win changes the policy, upends it completely.
Yeah, well, look, you're absolutely right, and we've said this all along. There has to be bipartisanship on this, because one of the main things that has been behind the rise in prices in energy is a lack of policy certainty. That's certainly true. We want to get this done. And as you said, though, the main culprit in actually undermining a bipartisan approach has been on their own side, the government's own people. Tony Abbott and co and the Dad's Army that is otherwise called the Monash Forum. These dinosaurs have been undermining their own government in many respects and undermining a bipartisan approach. Having said that, we don't want to sign on to a blank cheque. There's some real design flaws in the NEG. It can be improved. There's some issues around competition. The submissions that have been put in by industry, by stakeholders, by consumer groups have all highlighted the fact that the design flaws mean the top three retailers become stronger, and that actually can only lead to a rise in prices. But that can be adjusted. We can't do anything about the low ambition of their renewable targets. That's what this government is putting forward. But there can be a bipartisan agreement on this, and we're very much up for it. We've said that before, that we'll work with the government.
All right, let's wrap up, if we can, in your home city of Melbourne, and the Victorian Parliament apparently seeing less primary school students going into Parliament during question time because of the risk of being exposed to bullying behaviour. My friend at the Herald Sun, James Campbell, the political editor, notified me of this particular story overnight. It's a bit of a worry, isn't it? You'd hope that students do get exposed to democracy, Tim Wilson. Should they be reining it in, your state colleagues?
Well, I always try and play the policy, not the person, and so I'd encourage my state counterparts on both sides of politics to do the same thing. I think you'll notice there's been a very civil tone in the discussion we've had today. Nobody's interrupting each other, just to set a moral and a standard for the Australian community. But the truth is I'd like to see improvements in the federal parliament as well. It's a time becomes unnecessarily rowdy. Of course, we're going to have differences of opinion on policy. Democracy is about choice, and people should feel free to stand up and vocalise it. But the more we can maintain a degree of civility and standard debate, the more we're ultimately focusing on what's in the best interest of the Australian people.
Peter?
Oh, look, I agree. Look at this bipartisanship just on this interview. I agree. You've got to play the ball, not the man, and work, and the ball being the policy. We're going to disagree on policy, but that's why this system actually works. The Westminster system works so effectively because we can have a contest of ideas. And if we do it respectfully, it can get willing sometimes because you've got to be passionate about it. But we don't go after the person. I respect him, even though I might not agree with everything that comes out of his mouth. It's actually quite sad that the kids are not seeing question time up front. We get a lot of primary school kids in the federal parliament, and they come, they wave at us, they watch it, and it's really important that they understand how our democracy works. So I hope the Victorian government or the Victorian parliament can actually get better at that and get the kids can go back into question time. Yeah.
I agree, Peter and Tim. So bipartisan, and well, there's a template for them. They can copy your approach. Thanks for that, Tim Wilson, Peter Khalil. That's all. We've got time for a quick break. Back in just a moment.